If people call you impulsive, you should take that as a compliment because it means you have learned to listen to your gut rather than just your brain. I was born in a foreign land, never lived in my hometown, moved to Dubai when I was 2. By the time I was 18, I had successfully dropped out of 3 different universities. And so I define myself as a perpetual outsider who happens to be an entrepreneur. You can only disrupt an industry when you're an outsider. If you're from an industry, you're forever shackled to thinking exactly with the formula of that industry. I don't have that burden. Living beyond the numbers is permission to be great. It means you do not have to define yourself with labels that have been attributed to you by other people. I run a series of companies that help governments, global brands, and startups understand themselves, build on their strengths, and tell unforgettable stories. If our central defining purpose can be to always be focused on the niche of the extraordinary, then it doesn't matter what we do. What matters is how we get there and what comes out the other end. My name is Danish. Follow your heart, but take your brain with you.
Welcome, everyone, to this special fireside chat for the Canadian Entrepreneurship Readiness Program, powered by Tree Frog Accelerator. Today's session is all about entrepreneurial mindset, how it evolves and travels between cultures, and how certain mindset stays the same in certain areas, but sometimes being a global entrepreneur means your mindset needs to shift. And today, we couldn't be more excited than to have our guest, Danish Farhan. Danish is one of Middle East's most accomplished entrepreneurs turned investors. He leads Zishay Ventures and Zishay & Co., headquartered in Dubai, advises on major government initiatives, including the UAE Prime Minister's Office, the Dubai Future Council for Energy, and the UAE Mars mission. Hopefully there soon. He co-authored Dubai's Happiness Agenda, serves on several boards, and recently directed Bedouins of the Wind, Dubai's first feature film on Bedouin culture. And he did this first ever unofficial premiere in this very room. I don't know if we're allowed to say that, but anyways, it happened in this room. He's also an international speaker, a brand ambassador, and a father, and also my cousin. He's someone who's just as comfortable on a film set as he is in the boardroom. Um, he's a brand ambassador because of the way he carries himself, but also because of the mindset he has as a global entrepreneur. I've known you since I was a kid. You've known me since before I was a kid, theoretically. He taught me how to drive at age 12, which back then driving laws weren't really a big thing. He taught me about style, he's still teaching me about style, and of course, a mentor in all things business. Welcome.
Thank you, Amr.
People ask this question all the time. What is your earliest memory? I always think back and I go, I don't know what my earliest memory is. It definitely wasn't when I was 4 or 5 years old. But ironically, when I think back, I think my first memory is of something to do with you and business. It's probably why we're destined to be in this room together.
Wow.
I remember the first ever company you created. It was called 13th Studios. 13th Studios, I think it was. And I remember the business card you had, black on both sides like a flag, and this gradient blue in the middle with this stylized 13 in the middle. I still have that business card. I don't know how old that business card is. Many, many years ago.
25 years.
25 years ago. That's one of my first memories in the apartment of your parents in Gises. And I remember hearing the story about how you sold something without any idea how to do the thing that you sold. And I think it was a website. I think that might be a good starting point. If you could just give us a little bit of a story of your young days and how you became an entrepreneur in that moment.
Sure. Thank you, Amr. This is surreal, unusual, and exciting because normally, if I'm sitting on a podcast or an interview, part of the goal of the interviewer is to figure out who I am and for me to figure out who they are. It's safe to say you have seen a lot of my stories in real time, and I have seen you since you were in diapers.
No diapers today, guys.
Um, all right, I think that's probably a great place to start. I call myself an accidental entrepreneur.
Hmm.
So when people ask me, how do you define yourself? I always say I'm allergic to gluten and I'm allergic to labels. The moment you get pigeonholed, you just cut off the possibilities of everything else that is sitting right in front of you, but you just never get up to grab it. My entrepreneurial journey was equally accidental. I grew up in Dubai. I have been there for over 40 years, which makes me something between an outsider and an insider. But when I was a kid, I don't think I realized how much that was shaping me, or you for that matter, back then.
Mm.
Um, and the internet had just arrived in the UAE in 1996. By 1997, I had learned to code in HTML.
Mm.
Um, I was 16, I think. Yes, 16 years old. And by 1998, I realized this is going to be a game changer. But the problem was, my most vivid memory of the birth of the internet was being so proud of having an email address, but being so frustrated because there was nobody else that I knew that had an email address that I could actually send an email to. And I think these little anecdotes just solidified my view by 1999 that I need to do something with it. The world's going to change, but more importantly, Dubai is going to change.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could get a head start on this, um, there'll be a story to tell. And 25 years later, I'm actually just quite humbled by the fact that it was the birth of a story. Um, I dropped out of three different universities, so around that time when the internet was arriving, I was torn between doing what is right, go to university, get an engineering degree. I had learned to code by then. I was designing by then. Um, but then I also had this responsibility to go out and get a certificate, a piece of paper that is apparently meant to tell you that you are allowed to go out into the wild, wild world. Um, and that's sort of how it began. Didn't tell my parents. Did some temp work in Emirates Airline, of all things, back then as an 18-year-old, and decided to go set up the first web agency in the country. When I arrived at Dubai Media City, they didn't actually have a category for this type of business, and they said it was going to cost about $30,000 for the license and the office. I didn't even know what that money looked like, let alone have it. I had exactly $3,333, and a lot of them were coins. And I remember saying, "Can I get myself a license? I'm going to work from home." And they said, "Well, you're not legally allowed to do that, but we've run out of space. So you've got 9 months, but you have to give us some post-dated checks, and those have to be banked." And the laws were not like they are today. If you bounce a check, you're bounced right out. Um, so that was my motivation, not to go to jail. And 6 months in, I had knocked on, I remember, something like 600 doors, trying to convince everyone from the dealership for BMW all the way through to art galleries and government institutions. The internet's coming.
Yeah.
It's going to be big. You need a presence on it. And I think I had three reactions. First is, who are you, little kid? Number two was, what is the internet? And number three, you don't understand our business. We do just fine.
Yeah.
Um, 9 months later, just about when I was ready to go to jail, I had knocked on over 1,000 doors, um, and I would do this with this idea that I can sell something that I haven't quite figured out how to build yet.
Yeah.
And I think that was going back to your question.
Yeah.
But I had this delusional, I think I would call it delusion. I had this delusional self-belief that I could figure it out. Convincing somebody is much more important in any entrepreneur's journey than actually delivering on it, because you will figure it out. Once your commitment's been made, you'll figure out the how.
Yeah.
Um, and BMW and this gentleman by the name of Tim Trenker, who I still remember to this day, a German gentleman, says, you and your company, I think, understand our ethos, and you can build us our web presence. And when he said you and your company, it was just really me and myself, and a lot of books on Photoshop and Flash in those days.
Yeah.
Um, in the process of pitching, I had already built it.
Yeah.
That saved me from going to jail. It also was the birth of the company, but it was still a tightly held secret
Yeah.
because the advice that I got across from everybody socially, within the families, friend circles, my professors and teachers was, what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
Just go to university, just like everybody, and then start your journey. And I was just really restless. I thought this opportunity happens
Yeah.
once in a lifetime. What we're going through with AI is that second opportunity. And I
Yeah.
think, my kids are at the cusp of the same thing at the same age, 25 years
Yeah.
later, that we experienced when we were kids.
Yeah.
So that was sort of the beginning. Fast forward 25 years, I don't even know how to contain all of the failures and some of the successes.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because 96, 97 was when internet was coming in and people were saying one of those three things, which is, who are you? Today, I don't think people say, who are you as much because a genius can come from a 12-year-old or a 90-year-old. You don't know where it comes from.
Yeah.
But the other two answers, which is, you don't understand us or what is internet, are probably often a lot of uh, responses startups, especially in that AI space, are getting. They're AI experts. They may not be experts in their field.
Yeah.
And they're telling their customers or potential clients that
Yeah.
AI is coming. And I'm sure some of them are hearing, well, what is that? It's just a fad. It's going to go away. And most of us in the space know that this is the next thing since internet.
Absolutely.
And so one of the questions we had about the mindset is, you obviously have a big element towards AI in the company that you're running right now. It's how do you frame your mindset to always stay ahead of the curve? I mean, internet was one thing.
Right.
It came fast, but if you look at it today, it was slow.
Yeah.
Today, AI is really fast.
Yeah.
I mean, I did a presentation last week on it, and by now I'm delayed. My presentation is outdated. So what kind of mindset do you have in terms of, people who are running fast-paced, scale-up type companies? How do you stay ahead of what's happening, but staying true to their core offering as well?
It's a great question, and I think I want to flip this for a quick second. I mean, the fact that you can articulate your question in that way means you have figured out how to do it, and clearly you're impacting a lot of entrepreneurs who are building their journeys with your assistance and guidance. So, give me one highlight of what makes it work for you, and then I will give you a longer answer.
Yeah, I think in my example, when I go through AI presentations, it's really knowing your audience, is framing the view of what the issues they are going to face in a way that they'll understand. So I can't go and throw just a complex tool like AI that requires agents to someone who's never heard of AI. You have to start simple. You start with, okay, just give me a document. Let me show you how it can pull out some information.
Yeah.
But, for individuals like that, it's easy because I'm going to the early days 2 years ago of
Right.
AI. But if I'm talking to someone who really knows what they're talking about, sometimes I'm behind.
Yeah.
And so I have to approach it with learning.
Yeah. So I think
Um,
so I would summarize your key learning as knowing the audience and tailoring your pitch to their problem and solving their problem. It has nothing to do with the tool, it has nothing to do with us, it's to do with them and their problems.
yeah.
That's going to be my jumping off point, because I think I always say what you're trying to solve is one thing, but you have to ask why one step further, which
Hmm.
is, who's your customer?
Yeah.
Every entrepreneur is not your customer.
Right.
Every entrepreneur has a customer.
Correct.
So I think if so, we're three stages removed from the real problem we're solving.
Hmm.
There's us with a solution,
Yeah.
there's the entrepreneur who is changing the world,
Hmm.
and then there's the customer whose life is going to be sort of never the same after they deploy a product or a service.
Right.
So I think we have to go down to the person that it changes to. Number one. Number two is, I think as I said, besides gluten, the allergy of labels, then AI has a branding problem because
Hmm.
until GPT became mainstream, AI had this sort of dystopian
Hmm.
Terminator vibe
Yeah.
around it. People don't understand it, so therefore they're afraid of it.
Yeah.
GPT made it much more accessible to say, hey, we don't need to solve the world's problems. Let's just solve your problems of understanding a complex email from your boss,
Yeah.
right? So you bring it down. So I feel like the moment you throw the word AI, it confuses people. The moment you pull back, like you correctly said,
Hmm.
and say, let's start with this little thing. Now imagine being able to do this 10 times faster,
Hmm.
100 times more,
Yeah.
and do it without any assistance from any other human being.
Yeah.
So it's like having a highly efficient, far more educated PhD engineer, artist at your disposal 24 hours a day, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of how I frame
Yeah.
what AI can do to you. And if you're not using AI in
Yeah.
anything today, um, it's like saying, no, I don't like driving cars because I prefer horses and a carriage. I mean, yes, I have access to it, but
Yeah.
I like the purest old way of doing it.
Or camels.
Or camels, absolutely. So I really feel it's not optional anymore, just like the internet was not optional back then, but people
Yeah.
took their time. But I think AI is definitely accelerating far
Hmm.
faster than how the internet became mainstream,
Yeah.
for sure.
It's only 2, 3 years at the
Absolutely.
end of
Do
the
you
year.
remember you and I were the loonies 2.5 years ago,
Yeah.
going and talking about
This thing.
generative AI
Yeah.
is really the radical shift that the internet was,
Yeah.
or electricity was, and
Yeah.
it took us a while,
Yeah.
but the rest have caught up, I think.
I think so. Slowly. I want to shift a little bit about sort of global mindset. So a lot of the audience
Yeah,
of this module are going to be international based founders,
right,
many of them in Asia, some in Dubai probably,
right,
who are looking to migrate their business and to a degree their families to North America. Not always.
right.
And so you've run originally from Dubai, but now you've expanded, and I'd like to say, Canada is a second home,
Yeah,
and New York and London and all those sort of expansion areas. And so the question I have is, the mindset that you need to succeed in a business in a place like Dubai, where it's a lot more hardcore and cutthroat than I have seen, where if you fail on a loan,
yeah,
it's not, well, start again, it's you go to jail sometimes.
yeah.
Whereas it's a lot softer sometimes in the
Sure,
North American market.
sure.
And so the question is how, if you do or don't, change your sort of entrepreneurial mindset towards operating in Asia
Right,
versus operating in either Europe and North America? And specifically, how did you have to change to
right.
succeed here?
That's a it's a beautiful question. Let's go back to the genesis of the copy paste culture of something that works in one market and
Yeah,
gets copied in another market, right?
yeah.
So I dealt with the opposite problem,
Hmm.
and it's called the Uber problem, right?
Yeah.
So you say, hey, I don't need to think of anything original. I'm just going to build Uber for tomato delivery, right?
Mm.
So because you've got this established model that works in a
Yeah.
market and you've got a monetization strategy, you have the right way of scaling it, of attracting customers. So you say, I'm going to copy paste it. Dubai went through that buzz
Hmm.
of copy pasting anything that made it past the $1 billion mark
Yeah.
and say, let's try it. I would say, statistically speaking, roughly 80% of them failed.
Mm.
And that's because there was no cultural context. So I saw it the other way around. When I then started investing in ventures or expanding our core business, I realized it was exactly the opposite problem. Dubai is so unique. You have no other market like Dubai.
Yeah.
We have 204 nationalities in a tiny city that is 4.5 million people,
Yeah.
of which 92% are expats.
Yeah.
Um, but what's the advantage of this market? It is the world's largest test laboratory
Mm.
because you have every culture that you check off the box. You have every conceivable social level of affordability. You have languages that are as diverse. You have exposure that's different. So if you go out and launch a product in a place like Dubai, well, the global markets look at Dubai as this tiny afterthought. It's the ultimate test bed. And the goal is never to service Dubai or the UAE. It's always to use that as test bed, expand to the greater Middle
Mm.
East, move to Europe, go all the way east, and then arrive in the West.
Yeah.
West is typically always the last stop
Yeah.
because you want to go and refine your product, understand the cultural differences,
Yeah.
and then move to the West. So yeah, so cultural fluency for me is it's not about what you're selling.
Yeah.
Is the problem that you're trying to solve the same for the person in market X
Right.
versus market Y? If
I
it's
think
the
a lot.
same,
Yeah, I think a lot of times the problem often is, let's say, the same.
yeah.
Ironically, I joke about in Dubai, you don't have to fill up your own gas.
Mm-hmm.
You just have someone do it.
Yeah.
There's a funny story of yours, which is you were driving down on the 407 and then you pulled over and called me and said, "What's the number for the gas people?" I said, "There is no number. We have no gas people. You have to fill it up yourself." And so that's a problem I would love to have solved here,
Yeah.
but there's cultural context to why that may not work, weather, accessibility, whatever
Sure.
it may be.
Sure.
So, is there something that, one thing that no matter where you are in the world,
Mm-hmm.
crosses borders from cultures where it's irrelevant
Yeah.
and it crosses borders? And is there one thing specifically when someone's building a startup that they have to know and customize for each
Yeah.
culture, each language, each region?
Uh, Another great question. Yes, I think the foundational truth, regardless of market, is your story.
Hmm.
And I think I always recommend to people starting out is figure out who you are not,
Right.
so that by eliminating, you figure out who you are.
Right.
And this to me is really powerful, because it's very difficult to say I have 100 choices of who I am and I'm going to pick one. No, just say I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this, and then you are left with a few choices, and you pick one and bet on it, and then you scale. So your story, spend 50% of your time crafting your story, and your
Okay.
story has to be moving enough that it is communicated to any customer or potential customer or a brand ambassador or an evangelist
Right.
who may not buy from you, but is going to tell somebody else who they see saying, "Hey, I have the right product for you. You should try this." You know, recommendations are massive, and they can only be moved because of your story. So I think
Right.
storytelling's the first. The second is everything is up for discussion.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as, no, this is our strategy, so we do not deviate from it. I'm sorry, but strategy
No,
is at
no,
best.
no holy cows, you call it.
No, absolutely.
Sacred cows.
A strategy is at best um a fictional prediction, right?
Yeah.
It's not a physical document. It's a living document that will keep changing based on what
It
you learn.
evolves.
It evolves. It evolves every day now in the day of in the age of AI.
It's funny you say that, even though, I'm in finance, and finance is one of the few professions where there aren't really opinions, they're sort of facts. It's either correct or it's
Yeah.
wrong. There's interpretations between that.
All right.
And I've operated in Dubai and in India and all those other places. But what I found crosses cultures and borders is that numbers matter
Mm-hmm.
to lead your information, but stories is what moves people.
Correct.
And it's even something like talking to an investor, you're talking about numbers,
Yeah.
but it's the story behind those numbers, either how you crafted them or how you've crafted the future, the hockey stick of that number set
Absolutely.
is what people are going to draw towards. And
Absolutely.
that sort of transitions me a little bit towards, the culmination of your career of storytelling with Bedouins of the Wind,
Right.
the feature film that you've sort of um, worked on by yourself for the most part on a very modest set of technology set. Um, you're talking about in that film about how do you create a story out of such a simple way of living for
Yeah.
people, and
Yeah.
something that goes back centuries really, but and I think that actually reflects a lot of how you've operated in your professional world is storytelling, not just your own story, but capturing your audience's story to understand on the other
Right.
side. So my question is for entrepreneurs, I don't think they're always thinking about storytelling. They're thinking about telling product.
Yeah.
And how should startups change their mindset about this shift from not telling about your product,
Mhm.
telling your story, and why that's important?
Mm, absolutely. The more you experiment, and I think, for me, my humble learning has been around saying the medium no longer matters,
Hmm.
right? Whether it's your story or it's your product or your service, we are now agnostic to medium, but the message matters.
Right.
And so for me, film or a book or a venture are really just my story,
Yeah.
but told through different mediums.
Mm.
And I think that's the key lesson for me is it doesn't really matter how you do it. Now back to what you just talked about. Um, if you're able to give yourself half your brain space to be completely suspended, don't think, don't force, don't push, don't have a goal, don't have a mission, and then the other half, focus it entirely on numbers, on growth, on metrics, on customer satisfaction,
Yeah.
on customer delight, on
Right.
solving real problems, on, I don't know, creating new IP. I mean, you could have so many different metrics, but I'd say if you start to do more than half of your brain space on a daily basis, that is to do with metrics
Hmm.
that are measurable, then you do not allow yourself the room to grow.
Mm.
And I think growth requires silence.
Mm.
And it's very, very, very much the opposite of what most people are busy doing, is they are running. But when
Yeah.
you run that fast, everything around you seems like it's moving so fast that you're competing at any given time.
Yeah.
But when you slow down, you see everything a lot more vividly and clearly. So I think being able to operate where you sprint like an athlete, but then you also recover like an athlete, it allows you to go back and sprint again. And I
Mm.
think to me, this has been a model which it's not some grand plan. It's
Yeah.
been an accidental way that works for me, and I have tried to instill that across my teams to say, let's do both.
Yeah.
You never know where the creativity unlocks. You need a little
Mhm.
bit of silence to be able to go and do the sprint,
Yeah.
to run, and that's where the real magic happens.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about silence. One of the things I love about you, and to a degree sometimes get jealous about, is the intentionality in which you sort of just disappear. I often talk about I can either get a WhatsApp response from you in a minute or in a week, and you never know which one of the two it's going to be. Sort of dealers draw on that. You don't just travel and experience the world for a leisure, although I think part of it is that you've done things like stand beside giant icebergs that almost fall on you in Alaska. You've ridden with horsemen in Mongolia. You've spent, I think it was 7 days isolated alone in the desert, which I think some may consider torture. And of course, you've lived among the Bedouins in the Middle East. So you immerse yourself in these areas where people forget you and you forget the world. And I find it fascinating because I think a lot of us are racing, especially in the early startup phase. You're racing, you're fundraising, you have a milestone and a raise and a milestone and a raise. And you just talked about how silence can often create the solution to roadblocks, like you do in all these travels. And then I think about my founders who don't always have the luxury of both time and money to experience some of these things, but their lives themselves are often just as crazy and immersive. I mean, you think about migrating a family from a place like Asia to North America in itself is like standing beside a giant iceberg in Alaska that might fall on you. Sometimes here it might. And so what I want to ask you is in these moments,
Yeah,
in these silence moments, let's say a founder can create this moment of silence, whatever it is for them. What are you thinking about? And how are you intentional about thinking about problems, or do you just kind of sit there?
that's first of all, that's a wonderful summary. um, I, that is a very difficult question, but I think I read this somewhere which really moved me, which is um, you don't get what you want until you become,
Hmm.
right? Whether it's a business or it's a who you are as a person, but you become when you get
Hmm.
what it is that you're chasing, right? So I think we're always chasing the thing because once I'm successful, then I'm part of the unicorn club. Once I'm successful, I'm the expat that made his story or her story work in a new country. If your business solves a real problem, becomes the first mover, then you're like, I'm this, and therefore I am going to become successful.
Yeah.
Therefore, I am an entrepreneur that is no longer going through imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Therefore, I'm a thought leader in my industry. But I have felt that that's the wrong way to go about
Hmm.
it. You know,
Yeah.
it's not the getting. You get what you want once you become. To
Hmm.
me, this is so powerful, and I only really truly learned this through the travels. You have to have, you have to be intentional
Yeah.
to be unintentional.
Hmm.
Just go and turn your brain into a sandbox. Don't have a goal,
Right.
and subconsciously what you're processing. So a lot of these vivid moments for me that are milestones in my life have happened without me knowing while I'm on a crazy trip.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't realize it at that time.
Right.
When I return on
Okay.
a random moment, having a coffee or spilling something on my rug, it sort of dawns on me something that took 2 months to percolate inside your head. So I
Hmm.
think if we can become a bit more intentional about being unintentional,
And
it's
patient, I
and
guess.
patient, absolutely.
It's not
Yeah,
like you go on a trip, you
yeah,
come back and
yeah.
expect the problems to be solved.
No, not at all, not at all. You have to wonder, and I
Hmm.
think I want to just bring it back to this idea of Bedouins, right?
Yeah.
Bedouin is a word that's coined from the word Bedu,
Yeah.
but comes from the French interpretation of Bedu,
Yeah.
and the definition is people who do not settle,
Right. Right.
and that's because they didn't know how. And this story
Yeah.
is 1500 years old. It predates, sorry, 3000 years old. It
Right.
predates, the Islamic history by 1500 years.
Yeah.
But what really moved me about that was not the fact that you don't settle, but the
Yeah.
fact that you wonder. You
Right.
really are, you dwell in the open, and that's
Right.
when you realize what's next. Bedouins would typically have a journey where they're moving from one nation to another because borders didn't really matter, and that
Hmm.
journey would take a year. So now their focus is getting to that place, not because
Yeah.
they need to get to that place, but because of everything that happens along the way.
Mm.
And so I think for me it was quite visceral,
Yeah.
and how literally I was able to see the parallels to say maybe there is a Bedouin and a nomad inside all of us. We
Hmm.
just have to keep it alive,
Yeah.
because that's really where I find magic.
In a way, entrepreneurs are those who do not settle for what exists around them.
100%.
Are there any sort of, not necessarily tricks, because everyone is going to be different in how they approach
Yeah.
this, but is there anything that helps you clear that silence? I think even me, it's
Yeah.
I can't nap because when
Mm.
I'm trying to nap, I'm
Yeah.
just thinking of work.
Yeah.
Is it sort of breathing exercises or is it just something that happens before you get there where you have to just have some sort of mindset? Like what helps you
Um,
create that silence in these things?
I, I think I I hate the word discipline because of how it gets misconstrued, but I have a definition for discipline, which is how I lead up to your answer. So I find discipline is really just the highest form of self-respect.
Hmm.
Okay, because people look at discipline as something I'm always going to fail at because I'm
Yeah.
not disciplined. When I
Right.
when I hear people say that, I say I'm hearing that you do not respect yourself.
Right.
So the moment you say I have the discipline to be able to schedule some time where I do absolutely nothing, and in
Hmm.
a literal way, if you take 2 hours a week where you
Yeah.
block it off in red on your calendar, and it literally says nothing,
Yeah.
right? You do nothing. You're not
Yeah.
on your laptop. You're not on Instagram. You're not really doing anything.
Right.
I mean, if you wanna go for a walk, if you want to go to the gym, it doesn't really matter. I mean, there's no formula for this.
Right.
But that intentional 2 hours per week where your
Hmm.
phone is on silent, your email notifications are off, and you're not chasing the next meeting,
Right.
um, it will be very uncomfortable
Yeah.
for the first few weeks, maybe the first few months. But after a while, you start to go, I have this crazy idea. I know I can solve this, but I don't have time right now. So I'm just going to deal with this
Right.
when I have my nothing session day after tomorrow.
Right.
So you start to stack things that you want to deal with when you've given yourself that intentional time.
Right.
This to me was radical.
Yeah.
It
Thinking
really
time, we
just
call
thinking time,
it. Yeah.
absolutely. And that thinking time can go from 2 days to say, who says we need to think as an entrepreneur? Um, why do you have to think in the 7 day week? Why do you have to think in
Yeah.
a 5 day working week? Why do you have to think of a 2 month vacation? An
Yeah.
entrepreneur, if they stack their life correctly and if they're able to delegate and build the right team that are equally passionate as you are as a founder,
Right.
you're able to say, actually, you know what? I work 10 times as hard, if not 10 times harder than everybody else, but for a month.
Right.
But that requires me to be able to take 1 month to do absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, there is no formula to say vacations happen once a year.
Yeah.
You could say, well, I'm going to take a week off for every month that I really work hard.
Yeah.
So you got to find your own, but the key is give yourself the space for the silence to become meaningful.
Yeah. I think that's a big part of the bustle here that you forget. Thinking is as important as doing. Um, and part of thinking is you're thinking about happiness. We talk about the Dubai Happiness Agenda, which you co-authored, which isn't really a thought on services or infrastructure. It's a layer in between, above and under it, where you're sort of helping governments design for emotional outcomes as opposed to physical outcomes like an investment or income. You're just thinking about emotion almost as a
Metric.
metric or something that you're receiving. You talked about on your website the idea that branding happiness isn't about feel-good slogans. It's about making thought, connection, and belonging the core deliverables to a venture. In a world where founders are often obsessed with product market fit and conversion funnels and deal ratios, which are all a level of something to get them to what they think happiness is, it's not a core of what they're thinking, either for themselves or
Yeah.
for their customers. So I'm curious how we should change people's mindset about approaching both problems and their selves and their businesses through this idea of happiness.
Okay. Absolutely. I love that summary. I'm going to steal it. Um, I want to give you maybe a 15-second on how this happened.
Yeah.
We were approached by the government to design, or not design, to actually help develop the smart city strategy for Dubai. And the proposed positioning for this project was to make Dubai the smartest city in the world. We've got the tallest building, we've got the largest underwater pool. I mean, Dubai is not new to the first. But then something struck me while I was sitting in that boardroom in December 2014, where I thought 500 cities in the next 5 years in China and India alone are going to claim that they are going to be the smartest cities in the world. Let's change the narrative completely.
Yeah.
So inspired by a poem written by the ruler of Dubai, where he muses about what is the role of a leader, it's perhaps the happiness of his people. That really struck a chord with me, not because I had really figured out what it meant, but it just felt like it was a fresh conversation.
Yeah.
Why do you build buildings? Why do you build a beautiful education system? Why do you have access to apps and everything now? The delivery culture. The goal isn't satisfaction.
Yeah.
The goal isn't to be a smart city. The goal has to be more than that.
Yeah.
What's left behind? So the difference between happiness and joy, happiness is an ice cream.
Hmm.
When it's done, you're done. Joy is when it lasts. But
Right.
nobody understands the word joy. So we thought, okay, let's just brand this entire city around the goal of creating happiness. So that was
Yeah.
the origin story of this. Let's fast forward. Let's talk about customer service.
Yeah.
You have failure
Right.
to satisfy a customer.
Yeah.
And the pinnacle of customer satisfaction is in the word satisfaction. Now,
Right.
you tell me, when you say I'm satisfied, it means that it's
Bare
mid,
minimum. Yeah.
right? It's the absolute mid.
Yeah.
I wanted to challenge that notion to say, let's not stop at that.
Mm.
Let our metric be delight.
Mm-hmm.
So you have failure, you have satisfaction, customer satisfaction, forget about that. Let's go after customer delight.
Right.
And can we actually create a metric that is based on science,
Yeah.
not art,
Yeah.
and so I borrowed heavily from the teachings of an extraordinary sort of modern day philosopher and psychologist by the name of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Um, he is the founder of positive psychology. So I took this idea and then we ported it into, can we turn this into a metric where if you're building a new flyover,
Right.
if you are building a new dam, if you're building a new sports stadium, you have to budget for it
Yeah.
in money, you have to budget for it in time, you have to budget for it financially. But
Yeah.
now you have to be able to state how many percentage points is this going to lead to in the uptake of happiness.
Mm.
So to be able to change the thinking of an entire nation where everyone has to go out and propose when they're submitting to the authorities,
Yeah.
what is the impact on happiness, as
Yeah.
well as everything else which is typical. That's sort of the how we ported it. Now, what does that mean to you as an entrepreneur? If you're going to be burning on both ends, if you're going to be deprioritizing everything that really matters in your life because it's important, I've got to just focus on work,
Yeah.
and you emerge 5 years later, you realize all the things that really matter may not always stick around.
Yeah.
Your child will never be two again, right? Your parents are never going to be as young again. You
Yeah.
will, you may never have the same level of health that you will have today.
Yeah.
You may never be able to go write that book and take that trip. So I really feel like if you start to think of yourself as, I'm not just going to be satisfied with what I'm doing, what I'm building,
Yeah.
I also need to find joy and happiness in it. And I can't just keep delaying it. And
Yeah.
that's not instant gratification, it's to say balance it.
Balance. Yeah.
Then let's take this philosophy into your customers. Is your customer really going to smile and say, holy crap, this was amazing. I can't
Yeah.
wait to do this again, or I can't wait to tell everybody else again, rather
Mm.
than, yeah, I ordered my delivery and it arrived. Cool. Well, it's not a conversation, right?
Yeah.
So I think around the metric of happiness for yourself, for your team members, for your co-founders, for your employees, and for your customers.
Yeah. Raise the bar.
Raise the bar.
Well, my percentage points of happiness have gone up. So, I think I'm gonna try and try and hope that a lot of the founders that are watching today have gained some valuable insight and also been able to shift their mindset. I think there was a lot in here that is very unique to you, but not unique to the way I think a lot of founders can approach things, which is don't think of satisfaction, think of happiness. Think of what can cross border culturally. Think about storytelling. Think about silence, intentional silence to solve problems, which is counterintuitive to, I think, a lot of people. Most entrepreneurs will think problem, lock in a room, find the problem, but it's the opposite for you and your success, which is lock in a room with nothing and no sound, no, one of those silence pods. I wanted to end with a couple rapid fire fun questions.
Sure. Okay.
So they're not many, but let's see what your gut responses are to this.
I will
I
try
think
my
I could
best.
probably guess some of these, but
Okay.
let's go. Bold risk or calculated bet?
Bold risk.
Early morning or late night?
Both.
Wealth or legacy?
Legacy.
Silence as power or voice as power?
Silence builds power in your voice.
Mm, Had to flip it on me. Solo night or group event?
Solo all the way.
Easy and boring or hard and challenging?
Is that a rhetorical question?
Sort of. Just making sure people know, take the challenge sometimes. Okay, impressionist art or mixed media art?
Uh, yeah, I'll pass. Just the moment you've described the art, it's no longer art.
Okay, just art. We'll call it just art. Beautiful or practical?
Uh, Beautiful is practical.
Hmm. This this is the response of an artist, and this is going to be the hardest one. Me or my sister?
Oh, I'm leaving.
It's my sister, for the record. Well, Danish, thank you so much for being here today. I had a lot of fun. I hope everyone enjoyed this, and thank you for being here.
It's absolutely my pleasure. And today we talk about happiness points. Mine have gone through the roof. I think to 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 have witnessed your journey from where you started to where you are,
Yeah,
and the fact that you have decided to focus on empowering others to take from these lessons and to curate this experience, to me this is absolutely incredible. So I want to flip this back again to say bravo on what you're doing. I think all of these entrepreneurs and founders that are working with you are privileged that they have your point of view to be able to look at the world and solve problems and leave that legacy.
thank you.
Thank
Well, legacy over wealth.
you. Absolutely.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, everyone and girls.